right, good morning, everybody. Yes, I like the energy. It's great to talk to you while your brain is not overflooded with all the information that's about to come this week. How's everybody? Excited for our Data and AI Summit? Yes. Woo, yes. Okay. Yes, today the two of us will be talking about IDEs and how you can use IDEs with Databricks. My name is Fabian. I'm a senior staff engineer at Databricks. I'm working on developer tools for customers, like customer-facing developer tools. I've been at Databricks for like 2 years now. And with me I have James.
I'm James Blair. I work at Posit as a senior product manager for cloud integrations. So I focus on making sure that the tools and the products that we create at Posit work well with platforms like Databricks. And I'll be sharing a lot more about what that looks like in just a moment, but I'll turn the time back over to Fabian for the first part of our discussion today.
Great to have you. All right, so why IDE? Why do you guys want to use an IDE? I guess that's why you're here. Why do you want to use IDEs? Anyone? Key bindings. I didn't have that. Anyone else? Okay, awesome. Familiarity, awesome. Okay, you saw my slides, right? No. Yes. So let's see what I had. I had like refactoring, like safely change your code. Debugging, I think was here. Language features generally like go to definition, find references, all the goodies. Code completion, obviously. Git integration, also always great. Familiarity, exactly. So it's like you want to use the tools that you've always used and you want to use that with Databricks or with the problem that you have at hand. And generally, anything that's working with large code bases. And there's like this whole long tail of features, I think columnar indentation, that you can only have in an IDE that has like a vast ecosystem of extensions. So I want to give like a small rundown of the history of IDE support at Databricks. I think initially we had two things. We had dbConnect v1, which allowed you to run your code on your laptop and then connect to an IDE remotely. It had some good adoption, but it had some architectural flaws that made it really hard to use. It had like a lot of like sharp edges to get used, and yet people used it because it allowed them to use an IDE. A little bit later came DBX, which was or is a tool to do CI/CD for jobs. You can declare your jobs as code. Version control it together with your Python code or notebooks. That is something that the field developed, but it never graduated into like a proper Databricks engineering supported project. That was kind of the state in 2022. That's when we decided to create like a team to kind of collect all these like disparate features and create a team that's kind of only responsible for developer tools. That's when I joined Databricks, and then we started on, did like Terraform, IDEs, SDKs, and all these kind of things. But I'll focus on IDEs here. Last year, here at Data and AI Summit, we launched the GA of the Databricks extension for VSCode. So I was here on stage, Jakobs, who is looking at his telephone in the back. And basically what it allowed was like to synchronize your code to a cluster and then execute it remotely on a cluster. But you could use the IDE to edit your code. We also announced Databricks Connect v2. This is not from our team. This is like a whole ecosystem around Databricks Connect v2. It's essentially built on like the things that worked for DB Connect v1, but like put like on a solid foundation, so it actually scaled and like removed a lot of the sharp edges. And today it's actually powering a lot of Databricks internally, like serverless notebooks runs on DB Connect v2. Spark Connect, which is the basis for DB Connect, is part of open source Spark, which DB Connect v1 never was. So this is actually something that is like very foundational to what we are doing. And it allows also to run your Python code on your laptop and then connect to a Databricks cluster remotely. Earlier this year, we launched DAbs, Databricks Asset Bundles. Anyone heard of DAbs already? Wow, that's quite a lot. Peter in the back of the room is going to give a talk later on Thursday, I believe, to go into the details. But basically, it's like a an evolution of DBX. It's like an opinionated project model where you can define your jobs, your pipelines as code, and co-version it with your code. And that allows like for an end-to-end CI/CD solution. And today I want to talk a little bit about what we've done in the past year. We launched kind of a revamp of the VSCode extension. Main feature is that we're adding depth support to the VSCode extension, and I want to talk to you and actually show you how that looks like. So today we announce VSCode extension v2. It's in preview. You can go to the marketplace and try it. And what's new? So one thing is we further simplified the setup process. So setup is even easier with the new extension. It also integrates the configuration information with depth. So if you configure a workspace for depths, the extension will know this and vice versa. One thing we learned, and basically whenever we showed the extension to customers, we basically always told them, you have to set up a virtual environment, you have to install certain libraries, and we kind of baked that into the extension to make it very, very easy to kind of create and set up Python virtual environments. Then we also added project templates. I know it for myself, I open an IDE, I start a project, and if I have a blank slate, I don't know what to do. Like, how do I structure my code? Where do I put things? What are the best practices? So we actually added project templates to depths to the CLI and exposed them in the IDE. So we can say, like, create me a Python project. I want to have a pipeline. I want to have a DLT. And it creates like the structure, the notebook, some unit tests, everything ready to go. And last but not least, we made it so that you can actually use Databricks asset bundles from the IDE without actually having to touch the command line. You can do everything from the command line, but the IDE is the integrated development environment, so you shouldn't have to. So that's what we added. Cool. Let's jump into the first demo, just to show some of these features. But before I do this, I have to talk about cows. Who was there last year in this session? Nobody? Awesome. Do you remember cows? Very much so. Okay, so basically what we did, Sat and I, our product manager, he had a startup creating a Fitbit for cows. And as our demo project, we had to do something cow-related. And he told me that cows actually have friends. And they're very social. And our hypothesis was that if cows are friends, they have their lunches together, their meals together. And we have sensor data to see when they have their meals, and then we can compute the overlap and compute like which cows have the longest overlap in their meals, and therefore are probably the best friends. So that's what I'm going to continue. So my demo is basically basing on that demo project that we have. So keep in mind, cows have friends. Okay. Yeah, let's do live, because why not? So this is the project. It's on GitHub. You can basically check that out. First thing I want to do is I want to actually configure Databricks. I haven't configured Databricks yet, so even zeroth thing, you might want to install the extension. So you go to the marketplace. Better? Thank you. Thanks for the feedback. You can switch to pre-release here. If you click this, then you get the pre-release release. Once we launch J, this is obviously not necessary anymore, but if you want to try what I'm showing, then you can do this. And then I go here and configure or migrate this project to a Databricks project. So I click this. This will show me a list of all the workspaces, Databricks workspaces that I have in my Databricks profile, or Databricks config. You can also configure like a workspace manually, but I already have one in my Databricks config, so I'll take that. And basically, what's happening now, it's connecting to that workspace, getting a bunch of information. So one of the things I would want to configure is which cluster to run on. So I mentioned like the model is I synchronize the code to the workspace, and then I kind of remotely run on a cluster, so I have to select a cluster. Conveniently, I have one running, so you don't have to wait 2 minutes until it's here. And then also mentioned there's like a Python environment that you can configure. This is still red, so let me just click this guy and say like create virtual environment. And I want to have Python 3.11. And it asked me like, which packages to install. I have a requirements txt that's part of my project, and that's what I want to install. And while it's doing this, maybe let's have a quick look at the requirements txt. So nothing too fancy. I have IPyKernel because I want to later show how to use Jupyter notebooks from VSCode. I have PyTest from unit tests. I have Plotly and to show my diagrams, and then I have Databricks Connect because I want to demo Databricks Connect later. If I wouldn't have Databricks Connect, the extension would tell me and would actually recommend to install it, so I can actually use the Databricks Connect functionality. So, sorry? Sorry, I didn't get that. This is actually building on the Python environment support in VS Code. I believe VS Code does support it. I haven't tried it. But it's basically using the functionality from the Python extension VS Code. OK, so let's see. Let's just reload real quick. Oh, it's still running. That's why it doesn't. Yeah, you see it's green. So now I know like Databricks Connect is configured properly. The environment is configured properly. I'm good. So let's go to the notebook and see and look at our best friends. So this is the notebook. I load a table from my workspace. I do some displaying. Then I have like a library that computes the heat map, like the overlap, which is, let's go to definition. I refactored into like a Python module, which is like one of the reasons you want to use an IDE, because you can very easily modularize and work with multiple files. And then I display the heat map. And you notice this little icon. This is new, this beautiful Databricks icon with a run button. And this is basically what we launched last year. Close this. This is kind of the original feature, which basically now synchronizes the code to my workspace into a hidden folder, and then creates like a one-off job to run my notebook as a job on the cluster. What's nice about this is like 100% fidelity. It runs exactly as it would run in production because it's actually running on the cluster unmodified. You also see the downside a little bit. It's taking longer to run, and there's like no interactivity, right? I send the whole file. I wait 20, 30 seconds. Should be 30 seconds. And then I get like the result as a whole back, but I can't really go step through it. OK, this is taking longer than I wanted to take. Oh, yeah, OK, 42 seconds. Right, and then I see now the results. Like I see the table, I see another table, and I see my results. And what do we have? We have this red dot. That's Mocha and Coca. These are the best friends because they have the longest overlap in their lunch times. Awesome. So we saw what we could do, but we also saw like it's not perfect because we have to send the whole file, we have to wait, and there's no like really interactive loop. For that, we can use DB Connect. DB Connect, you saw, is already configured. I have this beautiful check mark. You can also see this in the bottom bar. And what you would do is, for example, if you want to run like a notebook with it, you select the virtual environment that you just created as the virtual environment, as the kernel for DB Connect. And the VS Code extension would make sure that it injects like the credentials and the Spark session so you can actually use it. So I can now run like cell by cell. Like this is boring because this is like local code anyways, but this is getting interesting here because here we load a table. That works. And now we do the display. The nice thing is Spark is like lazily evaluated. So even if the table is like, I don't know, 1 terabyte big, if I just show the first 10 items, it's only sending the first 10 items because all of the data remains on the cluster. We never like materialize it on the notebook until we actually ask for it. And as long as I limit it properly, it's not sending a whole bunch of data over. Right, and then we can compute the heat map, and then we display the heat map. Right, so now I can go back and forth. I can do like really interactive notebook development, the same way you would do it like in the Databricks product, but you get like the extra language features, you get like Copilot and code completion, go to definition, all of that. What you also get, which is very often requested, is you can debug this thing, right? So I set a breakpoint here, I said debug the cell. So it now stops into the breakpoint. I can go into the code, and for example, now I see what I'm doing. Actually, I'm creating 2 data frames and then creating kind of the cross product between the data frames to compute the overlap. And let's say I want to see what's in car 1. So let's execute to here. View debug console, let's see. I see it's a data frame, like it's, let's say we want to head, no. Okay, let's actually do shows instead of head to format it a little bit nicer. But you see how you can basically interactively look what's in the data frame. You can inspect variables, you can step into. So this is basically just like you would use any Python, because it is any Python, right? It's running on your laptop. There's nothing special. Okay, let's continue. And then last but not least, this is not limited to notebooks. You can also do the same thing with like Python files. So if you have a pure Python file, you can also run it with dbconnect. You can also run it with sending to the cluster, like both modes work. You can also do this for unit tests, and I have some unit tests in this repo. And I have like 2 different unit tests. Like the first one, the calculate time overlap, that's a UDF that we use to calculate the overlap, but that is like a pure Python function. So unit test for that is trivial, right? Everybody can test pure Python functions. There's no side effects. This is easy. The second one, compute the heat map. This actually takes in a data frame, right? So this is something that is actually testing Spark code. The way we test it here is essentially we create a data frame as an input, and then like a known data frame, we send it into the function and then compare the data frame with what we expect. But we still need Spark in order to execute it. And in this case, what I want to do, I actually want to run it with the DBR on the cluster, so we use Spark Connect, and that also works. So like if I run this thing here, it will actually run the test. The first test just locally, the second test needs Spark, so it will actually run it with dbconnect against the cluster. And you can set it up so that like your test runner does it, like GitHub Actions does it. That's basically standard testing. Cool, so first demo. Essentially, this is more or less what we've had in the VSCode extension today. I think dbconnect has become a lot easier, a lot more integrated. So let's have a look at the new stuff. Wait, no, here, the bundles. I want to talk like real quick, like what are bundles? So basically, Databricks asset bundles define resources, deployment targets, and overrides in YAML configuration. So you can define your jobs, your workflows in YAML, and then co-version it with your source code. This becomes like part of the source code. You have your notebook and the definition, and you can commit it to Git and then deploy it together as a unit. The deployment is happening through the Databricks CLI. There's a bundle command in the Databricks CLI, and you can use that to deploy, to validate, to destroy a bundle, to run targets. So let's say you define a workflow, like a job, and you can run that job from the CLI. And you can execute this from your laptop, from a CI/CD pipelines, and of course from the IDE, which is what I want to show now. Okay, have a second. So I think this has to be bigger too. So same project. So let's say we have our cow analysis, and we know which cows are friends and which are not. But the farmer wants to know this every morning. When he reads the newspaper, you also want to have a report, how are the cows doing? So the way we do this in Databricks is we use a job that has scheduled every day. You could now go into the Databricks UI, create a job, and do this manually, but nobody is able to trace what has changed. You maybe want to deploy a change, and how do you test it? Like, this is going to get unwieldy at some point, so we want to do this proper and actually do this in code. So what I did then is basically I described the job that I want to create in a YAML format. So this is my job. I give it a name, like cow BFF report. I create a jobs cluster with like a Spark version and an instance type. And then I define the task of my job. Like in this case, I only have one task. I could have many tasks. I could have really complex jobs. But for the sake of the demo, I just have one task. And you might notice that the notebook path here is a relative path. So this is basically pointing to a file relative to the YAML file locally. And what's happening is when I do the deployment, I copy the files over to the workspace, and then the DAP CLI will basically resolve that, replace this relative path with the absolute path on the workspace file system. And of course, I mentioned it's like the entry point is Databricks YAML and not daily report job.yaml. So what happened here? I have an include, which basically says all YAML files in resources are included. I could inline this here, which is also perfectly valid and fine. But in order to structure it a little bit more, I factored it into the resources folder. And I define a set of targets. And targets is essentially where do you want to deploy to? Like classic CI/CD, you have like development, staging, and prod. But you can do whatever works and makes sense for you. In this case, development is what I'm interested in. I set mode to development, which enables a few extra checks and behaviors that are useful for development. I set default to true, which means if I don't specify a target, this is the target that we're going to use. And I define a workspace. So if I deploy to development, then it's using this workspace. And I'm going to do this now. So one thing you might notice is the bundle resource explorer. This is new. And I can go ahead and click this little icon, which is bundle deploy, which will now take the project, the description, and create a job and upload the files. Okay, that's it, already done. Let's actually take a look. I can click this link. We see that it actually did create a job. Just see how it looks like. So one thing that's noteworthy is that the name was cow BFF report. But since I defined dev mode, it put like a prefix, which basically put the target and the user as a prefix, which is useful because, like, let's say Saad also is working on this, also wants to develop on it. We don't want to step on each other's toes. We want to like neatly namespace it. So in dev mode, we make sure that all the resources are scoped to the person doing the deployment. You might also notice, and this is really small here, but the Databricks backend knows that if a job is deployed through dApps, and then basically makes it read-only. Where the intention is like, if you deploy something through CI/CD, you actually usually don't want to have manually tinker with it, because the next time you deploy, these changes are overwritten. You can actually do break classes, say detach it from the dApp and make changes, also maybe for debugging purposes. But the idea is that if you deploy through CI/CD or through bundles, you don't do manual changes anymore. The question?
The question, all the release pipeline, will it be called by GitLab or as elements?
Yes, you can do it manually, but I'll come to this in a sec. So next thing I want to show is you can also run from here. Like we now created the job. And the normal like IDE run is like an ephemeral job, but this is like an actual job that we create. I can click the run button here. Again, this will do like a deploy. Since nothing has changed, deployment is really, really quick. And then it's running. But there's a bit of a caveat here. You will see this uses jobs compute. And if you've ever tried to use like jobs compute to test something else interactively, you know that this is the time to grab a coffee and wait for 2 minutes for the cluster to start. This is not a problem for production usually, but if you're developing, this is actually not what you want. So let's actually stop this here. So basically what we did is like you already we already define a cluster, right? For the normal IDE interactive development, we already ask you to define a cluster. And what we can do is to say, overwrite the bundle cluster with the cluster that we already defined. And if I run now, then instead of using the jobs cluster that I defined in the bundle during development, it's actually using the interactive cluster that I defined here. And now I can actually iterate, right? Cluster is running. This is, instead of taking 2-3 minutes, this should be like 10-15 seconds. Right, so this is already done, this is already done. This is running. This is already done. So instead of waiting very long, this is now something that you can actually do during development and like iteration without actually having to wait a bunch. There's a question in the back. This actually does support serverless compute already. You would have to change the jobs YAML file to use serverless compute, and then you can actually use serverless jobs. So the IDE itself, not yet, because the serverless compute also has a bit of a cold start issue, which makes kind of the interactive usage not pleasant yet, but we're working on that. But the jobs you can definitely do serverless already. And then I think come back to your question here. You don't want to do development, you also want to deploy. So we allow you to define multiple targets. Let's say we have in this case, I created a prod target. I said mode production. Mode production basically makes it more rigid. There are certain things that you should be configuring, which makes sense in production. We, again, define the host. Typically, you would use like a different workspace to deploy to production. Maybe that's something that's more locked down. Maybe something where you as a developer don't even have access to. For demo, I use the same workspace, obviously. You can manually define like where to synchronize the code to. You can do a run as each deployment create resources with the same run as identity. If you deploy from CI/CD, you would probably also use the service principal for the deployment. And then one thing that you can do is like for each resource that you define, you can define overrides. Let's say for my job, I want to have a different name when I'm in production, or I want to have a different instance size when I'm in production, or like a different auto-scaling configuration. So all of these things you can actually override in the target, so you can actually tweak to what you actually want. I'm not sure if I understand the problem. Yeah. Right, yes. No, this happens when you use DB Connect. Okay, repeat the question. The question was, if you use UDFs in the IDE, there can be a problem that you can't resolve the UDFs properly when you run it with DB Connect. The reason is that if you run on the cluster, the file system is actually mapped into all of the executor nodes, and it kind of can resolve the dependencies and the other files. But if you use DB Connect, basically the cluster and the executor nodes have no idea. If you run on the cluster and synchronize the files to the cluster, you don't have that problem. If you run locally with DB Connect, you might actually run into this, and that's something that the team is actually working on right now. Let me put the questions to the end, so make sure that I can actually finish in time. Otherwise, James is going to sit here and then has no time to talk. That's not. Okay, so last thing, we defined prod. What we allow you to do is like in the IDE to switch the target. So let's say I do want to have like a test prod deployment, so I can switch the target here. I can you see that this is changed. So if I can deploy this here, I can do the testing. And if I'm done, I can also delete the stack again. Okay, I'm not going to wait for, oh, it's actually, let me just open this guy. So this is now the prod one. And you will see that the name is different. The compute configuration is also different, right? So basically, it takes the overrides and uses them. And I actually don't want to keep it around, so I'll delete the stack again. And if this is a real production system, I should not be allowed to either deploy or delete from here. Cool, that's the demo. That's kind of what you can do with debs in the IDE. But we are not everybody wants to use VS Code, right? We said like familiarity, you want to use the tools that you're used to. You want to use what you're familiar to. And obviously, we are a small team. We can't build VS Code extensions for Databricks extensions for all the IDEs out there. But luckily, we don't have to. We have awesome partners. We partner with Posit and JetBrains to basically bring Databricks functionality also to other IDEs. First is PyCharm. This is new. We are partnering with JetBrains right now, and they are actively working on Databricks integration for PyCharm. And they've prepared a video, which I want to show you now.
JetBrains is excited to give a preview of our plugin with Databricks integration, bringing our professional IDE to the analytics platform. Let's take a quick look. Databricks support comes from our Big Data Tools Core plugin. First, make sure this plugin is installed. Then, open the Databricks tool window that it provides. Here's where all the action happens. You can add a new Databricks connection by using a profile or preferred CLI. Click Test Connection to make sure it works, then OK to save. Once connected, you can use the tool window to start the cluster. Once started, you're in the pending state, waiting for the cluster to be available. Now that the cluster is ready, it's time to run some Python code. First, open the Python script that you want to run. Then, in the tool window, click the button to run the script in the cluster. As the results come in, the tool window changes, and here you can see the generated graph as well as some details. This time, instead of a Python script, let's run a Jupyter notebook. We'll start by opening a notebook in the editor. This time, click the Run as Workflow button, and the progress indicator shows the notebook is running in the cluster, and then the results arrive. Click the View Results in Separate Tab button to see everything with more room, cells, graphs, and more. The Databricks plugin makes it easy to keep the IDE in sync with the cluster. First, switch to the Configuration section. Then scroll to the Stop Sync clickable link. Next, adjust the refresh interval. Now resume editing the notebook, for example, commenting out some lines of Python. Again, we run the notebook as workflow. The code runs. When the results arrive, we see they do not include the commented out code. Even if syncing was stopped before running in the cluster, we still sync the latest content. We're excited to preview how PyCharm can bring a professional IDE experience to Databricks. If you want to take part in the preview, send us an email. We'd love to get your feedback. And keep an eye out for general availability of the plugin in our marketplace.
All right, isn't that awesome? They do all the work, and it's going to be cool. They are the experts, right? They are the experts on JetBrains. So, wait. This is not what I want. Right, but we don't stop there. We have our Studio 2 and Posit Workbench. Posit was on stage last year here as well to show their first version of Databricks integration, and I'm excited to invite James on stage to tell us what has happened since. Okay.
Thank you. All right, thank you. It's clear there's a lot of exciting work happening in this world of IDEs and Databricks, and we're excited to announce what we've been working on at Posit related to our Databricks partnership. Just a little bit about us if you don't know who Posit is. We are, at our core, an open source company dedicated to open source data science, regardless of, and making that available regardless of economic means or availability. We promote scientific research and reproducibility. And if you don't understand what all that means, many of you may recognize this, which is the RStudio IDE. We are the company responsible for the creation of this IDE. We continue to maintain and develop this as an open source tool that's used by millions of users throughout the world for programming in the R language. We also support a number of open source packages, both on the R and Python side, that promote this idea of data science and data exploration. Tools like the Tidyverse, SparklyR, and others enable data scientists to get in and start working with data that may be stored in a variety of places, including Databricks. One of the things that we've been focused on over the past year has been improving the open source experience when using Databricks tools and capabilities from the R language. For example, we've made improvements to the SparklyR package that make it compatible with the latest version of Databricks Connect, so that you can connect directly to a Databricks cluster and push execution into that cluster while keeping all the data within Databricks itself, similar to some of the behavior that we observed in the VSCode extension earlier. We've also made some changes to the ODBC package to make it easier to connect to Databricks SQL warehouses and clusters through ODBC connections from R. If we take a look at what this looks like inside the open source IDE, on the right-hand side, once I've connected to a cluster through SparklyR, I get a nice visual ability to browse through the different assets that are available to me within Unity Catalog. I can see data, I can explore what's available, I can connect directly to it, and again, I can keep all of the data inside of Databricks while I explore interactively from an IDE that I'm comfortable and familiar with. Once I've gone through and connected to a data object that's inside of Databricks, I can write R code using the popular Tidyverse syntax to explore, aggregate, and summarize that data. What's fascinating about this approach is that once I execute this code, it behaves and looks as if it's operating locally, but instead what's actually happening is I'm submitting Spark SQL to my Databricks cluster where it's executing against the data there, and the results are coming back to me inside of my IDE environment. Like was mentioned earlier, Spark's lazily evaluated. We have some safety checks in place that prevent you from accidentally bringing billions of records into your local IDE. Instead, unless you explicitly ask for everything to be returned locally, the default is that only 1,000 rows get returned so that you can quickly iterate before finalizing your analysis. Now, let's talk for a moment about the requirements of making these kinds of connections. First and foremost, you need a way to authenticate. How does Databricks know who I am, what permissions I have, and what I have access to? We'll come back to that point in just a moment. Then with SparklyR, we need to have the latest release of the SparklyR package. There's some local Python dependencies. The same thing that was mentioned with the VSCode extension earlier is true here. We've done a lot of work inside of SparklyR to make it as easy as possible to manage the local Python dependencies required. If you try to connect to a Databricks cluster and your local version of Databricks Connect does not align with the version on that cluster, SparklyR will automatically prompt you to install a virtual environment that provides compatibility with the cluster you're requesting to connect to. On the ODBC side, you would need the latest release of the ODBC R package and then a compatible Databricks ODBC driver, which you can download from Databricks or directly from Posit. Now, just for a moment, let's go back to that first one, authentication. This is one as a company that, again, promotes open source technology and funds that open source technology through our enterprise products. We speak with many customers who have a challenge in this particular area. Security does not want individual users creating long-lived personal access tokens or injecting passwords as plain text into source code. It's not great practice and it keeps people up at night. What we've done on the Posit side is we've introduced changes to Posit Workbench that make it much easier to securely access Databricks tools and resources from your favorite IDEs in a way that allows security to get their well-deserved rest every evening. What this looks like is from Posit Workbench, when you start a new session, you can choose the environment you want to use and sign directly into your Databricks account. Once you've signed into your account and you start your session, there's a panel on the right-hand side that shows you the clusters you have access to, their current status, and other details. You can connect directly to these clusters through SparklyR ODBC and then interact directly with them from this environment without ever having to inject a personal access token or provide any sort of plain text credentials into your session. Finally, as we observed earlier, there's a lot of exciting work being done with VS Code and Databricks, and we're excited that Posit Workbench not only provides access to tools like RStudio, but also VS Code environments as well. All the benefits that we just heard Fabian describe in detail for us are available to users inside of Posit Workbench with the added advantage of this built-in authentication and security layer. Finally, and this is brand new for us, first time we're kind of speaking about it, in 4 to 6 weeks' time, there will be a public beta for a brand new development environment that we're creating at Posit that's focused on all that we've learned from RStudio over the past 10 years and making it available in a truly polyglot, multilingual development environment, heavily based on VSCode, but designed to be data science first from top to bottom. If you're interested in learning more, you can visit these QR codes and resources. And with that, I'll turn the time back over to Fabian. Thank you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, that's a wrap. If you want to learn more, we have Saad somewhere doing a talk on Thursday on CI/CD in an outer dev loop. We have a talk by Peter also here on Databricks asset bundles on Thursday. There's an overflow because the first one was full. And Teresa is giving an overview of like all the developer tools that we are building at Databricks, at least in our team. And with that, I want to say thank you. And if you have time for questions, I'm happy to take any questions.